colleagues and I understand the hardship that high inflation is causing, and we remain strongly committed to bringing inflation back down to our 2% goal. Nearly all FOMC participants expect that it will be appropriate to raise interest rates somewhat further by the end of the year. But at last week's meeting, considering how far and how fast we've moved, we judged it prudent to hold the target range steady to allow the committee to assess additional information and its implications for monetary policy.
That's a lot of big words. We better find out what those mean. Let's talk to somebody smart. Joining me now, William Luther. He's the director at the American Institute for Economic Research. He's also an associate professor. This just has to be the best job in the world. Associate professor of economics at Florida Atlantic. Professor, you're at Florida Atlantic University, so you get to teach, and you're also on the beach. Do I have that right?
That's right. It's like a mile and a half from the beach.
All right, those were big words. What was Jerome Powell talking about? Are my rates going up? Are they not going up? Is inflation coming down? Break all this down for us.
Well, let's start with the good news. Inflation is coming down. If you were to go back a year ago, inflation very high. That's really when the Fed started tightening monetary policy. It raised interest rates meeting after meeting after meeting until this most recent meeting in June when it paused those rate hikes. Now, I think a lot of folks were hoping that maybe they would pause them and hold them there for a while and then eventually bring them back down once inflation has gone down. But what Fed officials are telling us is that rate hikes are likely to resume, most likely in July, and we can expect 2 further 25 basis point rate hikes this year.
Okay, so interest rates are going up. If inflation's going down, as you just said, then why are they still raising interest rates? Because interest rates only are supposed to be raised if we're trying to control inflation.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that Fed officials they're looking at core inflation. Core inflation excludes food and energy prices, and core inflation has been flat since December. And I think that they're concerned that suggests that although we're getting some disinflation right now, that's going to stall out and we're not going to make it all the way back to 2% inflation if they don't continue raising rates. Now, I think that's misguided. I think that the reason that core inflation is flat has a lot to do with how the housing component of that core inflation measure is calculated. In brief, we're not really looking, only at the housing increases in recent months, but those much larger housing price increases from months ago, a year ago. And so that overstates core inflation today. And if we were to strip that out, we would see that core inflation coming down as well.
Okay, so you're Fed chairman today. How do you handle this? How do you go forward? What do you want to do?
Well, if I were Fed chair today and had been for a few years, then I certainly would have conducted policy differently up until this point. The Fed got a very late start, and so inflation got way too high and lasted way too long. But at this point in the tightening cycle, rates are sufficiently restrictive. Inflation is coming down. And so the Fed today should just hold rates where they are and watch that inflation come down. And as it does come down, start to lower those rates back down as well. That's what I would be doing.
I saw a sign the other day. I was in Salt Lake City for a book tour thing, and I saw a sign. They were advertising rates that were over 6% for a mortgage. I'm paying 2.25 on mine, and my jaw about dropped. So they're bragging about it. Hey, come get over 6%. And then I saw Jerome Powell say this about interest rate cuts.
We're having real rates that are going to have to be meaningfully positive and significantly so for us to get inflation down. That probably means that certainly means that it will be appropriate to cut rates at such time as inflation is coming down really significantly. And again, we're talking about a couple years out.
we're a couple years. We have to deal with these rates for a couple years.
Yeah, we're in a difficult position, a position that we shouldn't be in, a position we wouldn't be in if the Fed had acted back in December of 2021. But it didn't act then. It drug its feet for 6 months. And so we got ourselves into a very difficult position here where inflation has been high and as a result is harder to bring down. And so that's going to take some time. The important thing to focus on, of course, is actually bringing that inflation down. That inflation makes it much harder for workers to experience real wage gains due to productivity. They see their wages eaten away over the course of the year by inflation, and then they have to engage in costly renegotiations to get those wages back up. And it would be better if we could just avoid that. And so we need to focus on that, bringing inflation down. The Fed's in a good position to do that now, and it's just going to have to stay the course here to see that happen.
Okay, you mentioned inflation's coming down, and that's a good thing. I know their target is 2%. I know everybody watching right now would very much like the value of their money to return. When do we get there? Is that coming next month? Is it a year? Are we going to have to live like this for 2 decades? When do we get back to that?
So the Fed is currently projecting 3.1% inflation for 2023. Inflation in 2024 will be a bit lower, or I believe around 2.5% they're projecting, and then around 2.1% there in 2025. So they're projecting that we're going to get closer and closer to that 2% target. But of course, even when we get back to that 2% target, that just means that we experience a mild reduction in the purchasing power of money from year to year, as opposed to the extraordinary reduction in the purchasing power of money that we've seen over the last 2.
Oh, wonderful. Professor, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Are you tired of watching your beloved nation fall prey to the insidious grip of communism? The Anti-Communist Manifesto by Jesse Kelly is the ultimate guide to fighting back against this destructive force. Discover the shocking truth about communism infiltrating our education system, corporations, and even environmental movements. Unmask the true agenda behind groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter and learn how to protect the United States from the most malicious enemy. With extensive documentation of past atrocities, you'll see the undeniable danger posed by this ideology. Arm yourself with knowledge and join the fight to preserve the American way of life. The Anti-Communist Manifesto, a new must-read book from Jesse Kelly. Get your copy today at jessekellybook.com or wherever books are sold.